Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report. If there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. Let virtue and understanding be in me. For my defense is in thee, O Lord, my Redeemer. For thou hearest a prayer of the upright in heart. In defining virtue and understanding, we must remember that these words are used here in their fuller meaning as expressions or activities of the soul or spirit forces, not as mental or emotional concepts. To establish a common ground, let us say that to be true to that which is pure in our purposes is virtue. Virtue is full cooperation that prepares the way for enlightening and uplifting humanity. Virtue is keeping ourselves in time with creative force, enabling us to know ourselves as we are known by others. Virtue is holding steadfastly to the ideal that is set in him, the Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Virtue is pureness of heart, pureness of soul, and pureness of mind that come through his Spirit bearing witness with our spirit. Virtue is the seasoning of faith, the essence of hope, and the crowning element of truth, an attribute of God. True understanding is beyond the reason of the senses. It is the power to experience and interpret the laws that govern the expression of creative force, or God, in and through the physical, mental, and spiritual bodies of humanity. Where there is virtue there will be understanding, for one follows the other. Understanding is the reward of virtue. With virtue, therefore, comes understanding, for the two are as the tenon and the mortise, they fit one with the other. Knowledge is not always understanding. Daily, many experience miracles of which they have no understanding. Few that have mere knowledge get understanding. An understanding of the mysteries of life comes to those only who make a close approach to the throne. We may know the course of the stars, the intricate formulae of mathematics, and the secrets of sciences, but we cannot understand God's laws until we have experienced that closeness with the divine that makes us realize that we are part of his laws rather than mere observers of them. It was no miracle to those who understood Stephen when he said, "Behold, I see the heavens opened, and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of God." It was no miracle to the Master when he fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. For he understood the law of supply. It requires an understanding of God's law, love, when such a message is heard even today as, "Lo, I am present with you in this room, I have chosen you as ye have chosen me. Keep the way thou knowest, keep the path thou hast trod. For he is able to deliver thee in every trial, and unto that one who is faithful comes the crown of life. As I am lifted up in thy consciousness, so will I be lifted up in the consciousness of others." With such an understanding comes a finer and more sincere relationship with others and a higher spiritual concept of self. We link virtue and understanding because they are expressions of the activities of the soul forces. Virtue built into the mind is the only sure path to true understanding. Knowledge assists when it is in harmony and in accord with the ideal, otherwise, it may become a barrier, a curse, and a dark pit from which it is hard to escape. The entity was then among those who made for self-improvement. Not necessarily aggrandizement of selfish interests, but the being virtuous for virtue's sake in the true meaning and sense of the word. This applying not merely in relationships to individuals but in relationships in things to come, peoples to come, conditions to arise. Then, the entity finds himself as a co-creator with the divine that is manifested in self. Thus, if the choice leads the entity into the exalting of self, it becomes as naught in the end. If the choice is that self is to be used in whatever manner, as in the talents, the attributes, the associations with its fellowmen, to glorify the creative force, then the body, the mind, finds that peace, that harmony, that purpose for which it chose to enter a material experience. Then, to the entity, it might be easily said, "Go thou and put that principle into thy daily practice." As indicated, there are few fields of endeavor in which the entity may not make a physical, a mental, a spiritual success. But what gaineth the entity to have material blessings and lose the peace, the harmony of the soul's enjoying same in its fullness of purpose, that is the prompting of the soul? Turn then to those things within. Know the law and then apply it daily. Not by some great thing. Smile often. Speak gently. Speak kindly. Go out of the way to do a kind deed, and ye will find that he will walk closer with thee, and thy life, thy purpose will become a glorious thing in this experience. Is my attitude toward my daughter and son-in-law right? This should be determined within self. For ye oft see within them the reflection of thine own self. Let the answer be within self and not from others. Throughout the greater part of that experience the entity gained, for it considered the fellow man. And ever, where there is the consideration of the tenets, others, Lord, it becomes a stepping stone for an activity that will bring comfort, satisfaction in the entity's material relationships with many. For, in those activities it aided others, and others ever should be the watchword for each and every soul. For the soul enters not by chance but for the unfoldment of a growth, of an activity. Let thy words be well spoken of, but let thy hopes, the emphasis of thy promises, the emphasis of thy expectancy, be ever one with that creative force that brings all into manifestation. Though many of his children become wayward and far, far afield, he has not willed that any should perish, but is left with the children of men, his brethren, that privilege of making those aware of this, whose lives and hearts have only seen the hardships of the earth in man's mad desire for power in his material self. He has left it to those of the faithful to make such aware. Then know, as ye walk in the presence of the Master, it will be as leaning on the arm of someone to whom ye have pointed the way to the Christ life, just as the beloved in the hour that there was set forth the emblem of the broken body and the shed blood, in order that man might ever be mindful of same, the beloved John leaned upon the arm and the breast of his Lord. Is there any way of eliminating those periods of doubt entirely? So fill thy mind, thy heart, thy purposes, with the love of him who hath given thee these promises, that doubt and fear, shadows of selfishness, will be eliminated. Put into practice day by day those promises, those truths. Just doing that as he hath given thee, as was the rule that prompted thee in thy activities. Here a little, there a little, line upon line, precept upon precept. Not as rote, but that the love of the Father, thy God, may be the more perfect in thy heart. Not as the keeping of this or that day alone, but that these, as the emblems of thine inner self, represent that he hath done for thee, and that ye may more and more attune to the infinite love that is shown thee. For as ye do it unto the least of these, thy brethren, ye do it unto thy God. In this may we find thy own way in the light of thy troubles, of thy abilities, of thy faults, of thy virtues. For all virtue is of him, and not of thyself. Know that whatever is good, whatever is true, whatever has virtue, should be considered. Think on these things. For it is the purpose, the spirit with which an individual entity applies new knowledge in the earth, that governs whether such knowledge becomes good or bad. For all knowledge is either put in reverse or is used as self-indulgence, self-aggrandizement, self-expression, without the thought of the first commandment, thou shalt have no other God before me. Whenever there is put greater stress on one phase of a human experience, or one phase of any urge that may have to do with the soul, the mind or the body, to the excess of another, it may bring question marks to many. But attune all such to him, the lawgiver, the law interpreter, who came not to do away with the law but to fulfill. Even as ye must do in thy daily life and daily application. In all thy getting of knowledge and understanding, get wisdom also. Asking of the Father in him who upbraideth not but alloweth every soul to seek, to express, to manifest in its own sphere. Only keep him first. Know as ye enter into the Holy of Holies within thine inner self, where he hath promised to meet thee, even as the pattern was given of old in the mount. In the mount of the Lord then within thine inner self, may ye commune with him. Not without the camp, for there ye find the rabble, the confusion. The seeking, yes, but in the still small voice that comes from within do the greater developments, the greater understandings, yea, the greater knowledge, come. This does not proclaim then that one shall live only a passive life, but rather a positive life, in the doings of self. For it is not what one knows that counts, but rather what one does about that one knows. For it is line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. For ye grow in grace and in knowledge and in understanding as ye apply that in thine experience, that makes the path straight, that keeps upon the way that is constructive in the experience. As has been seen, as is manifestedly expressed in the present experience, that ability to be a counselor, a guide to, a state to, those who would disperse truth, knowledge, understanding, in any direction, may the entity aid much in that tower of strength, created by the presence of the entity in groups, individuals, or classes, or masses. Then, keeping the faith that was gained in the vision of the Holy One, keeping the vision of that as was manifested by the activities of the faithful one in the healings brought, in the understandings gained, in the lessons as were taught, may the entity aid others in finding him, who is the way, the truth, the light, and who sitteth at the right hand to make intercessions for those that seek his face. Keep that inviolate in thine experience, and peace, mercy, joy and happiness comes with so doing. Hence the purposes for which the entity enters this present experience in the earth, that it may show forth in its dealings with its fellow man the ideal manner of meeting not only the material things that have to do with the body associations, but also with the mental and the spiritual. And as has been indicated, and as is known by the body in its experience, it is not what one knows in an abstract manner, but what one does about its knowledge, its understanding, in a mental, in a spiritual way and manner, that is to become a portion of the entity's activity, is that which makes for the constructive forces in the experience of this entity, in the experience of every soul. Then, let the knowledge and the understanding of that experience become not as an excuse, but as something that may be used as a stepping stone for the aiding and the comfort of many who will and do come under the activities of the entity in this present experience.